Hello, hello, hello. Good morning and good evening, possibly to some people, and hello to everybody who's watching this afterwards. Thank you for coming. I am here today with Adrian Tchaikovsky, author of City of Last Chances, author of Shadows of the Apt, and many, many other wonderful books. Um, is there anything you want to say, like an introduction for yourself?
Oh, hello. Thank you very much for inviting me on the show.
Awesome. Awesome. This is kind of like the start of one of my, I don't know, trying to start off a new series of like ponderings with authors. So basically, just where I go off and interview a bunch of authors. So yeah, thank you for coming. If you're watching, go ahead. If you have questions for Adrian in the comments, feel free to put them in the comments, and I will pop them up. Cool. So I noticed with Shadows of the Apt that you've said in a few places that you would come back to the world if a lot of people wanted it. Where do you think you would go if you would come back to it?
There are whole areas of the world which are barely even going to mention. It's probably my most kind of thought out fantasy world, mostly because I designed it as a role playing games campaign world, which meant you have to make that fairly robustly because you never know where the players will go, and therefore I kind of expanded the map in all directions. You never get to see the Spiderlands, for example, properly. There are a few scenes there, but there's a whole there's some Greek writing called the Anabasis, about a group of Greek mercenaries who get stuck in Persia after the Persian prince they backed gets killed, and the whole travail of them coming out of that. I really quite wanted to do a Shadows of the Apt version of that with a group of sort of beetle mercenaries in the Spiderlands. And yeah, there are lots and lots of places I could take the story. They would be fairly disconnected from the events of the main series of books, though. I don't think I'd necessarily go back to that group of characters per se.
Would you make it on an? Would it be a lot of more like individual one-off stories, or would it be like as epic as the mainline series?
I think I'd probably go for more one-off stories. That my writing is generally tending towards that these days. I've just finished the final Architecture, which was a full-on sort of epic intended trilogy, but in general I'm quite interested in moving around with my writing just to explore different parts of the world.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a little bit more of that standalone feature with like City Last Chances and House of
Opens.
It's been really nice. Kind of like that more, I don't know, personal and individual touch of I think you said like boots on the ground type of deal.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those. I mean, even with the Shadows of the Apt from the outset, it was in common with a lot of fantasy at the time. The characters were a few steps down on the kind of the power ladder from traditional fantasy characters. So it wasn't that kind of Tolkienian, here is a group of actual literal princes who are going to have an adventure. It was more, I've always been more interested in writing about more ordinary people, because I think there is a slightly toxic concept in traditional fantasy where only certain types of people are allowed to have adventures, and those people either have a particular bloodline or a particular magical gift or a particular prophecy backing them up. But the idea that regular people can accomplish anything rather than just having to sit around on their hands to be saved is absent from a lot of sort of late 20th century fantasy. And with the fantasy we started to get in the 90s and onwards, that's started to change. But I've never been that interested in writing about it's solely about the ruling echelons of a culture.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because like both of those concepts, like the any man can save themselves, and then also like the great man theory type of toxicity that you're talking about, is both of which in Tolkien. And a lot of fantasy started went with the more Aragorn route, whereas instead of ignoring the Hobbit route.
But I suppose even in the Hobbit, I mean the Hobbits are the closest sort of everyman stand-in you get, and even then the majority of them are basically kind of upper middle class gentry.
True.
And certainly Merry and Pippin are both very, very sort of posh kid hellions, and only really Sam is actually working class hobbit. And he, of course, is slavishly devoted to Frodo, which is, I mean, there's a lot of its time, and there's also a lot of, I think, of its writer's social class in there. I was talking on Blue Sky recently about the only or the majority of the depictions of common soldiers, as opposed to kind of the nobility in under arms, are orcs, which is isn't terribly complimentary to Tolkien's view of his fellow of the enlisted men he was serving with, I guess, in the war.
Yeah. And so you get into a little bit more of that with things like is Dog. So I haven't read Dogs of War, but I've heard you talk about it a few times. So is Dogs of War a little bit more like that, talking about the individual soldier in terms of that?
Oh, I mean, Dogs of War exists, I think, at quite a tangent to that, because it's a full-on sci-fi. It's to do with the dogs of the title are literally dogs, and that they are sort of uplifted animal soldiers, and it's more to do with how we treat the things we make and how we treat the things we want to own, I guess. Although weirdly, the most relevant thing that's come out of Dogs of War, which is just this idea of one of the chief reasons they have these uplifted animal soldiers is not because they're big and terrifying and effective; it's because they're deniable. So if your robot or if your sort of cyborg dog goes off and kills a bunch of civilians, whether or not it's at your orders, you can always disown it and say, "Oh, it's gone wrong." Sure. And we're seeing a lot of that with the way that people are trying to devolve decision making onto AIs right now in the modern day. And it's not because AIs are better at it; it's because that you can have the AI do terrible things that you want done, and then wring your hands and say, "Oh, who would have thought?" Mm-hmm. It's entirely to do with plausible deniability while still getting what you want.
Yeah. Anith is making a good point here that Guns of the Dawn also has that.
Yes, Guns of the Dawn is very, very deeply invested in just the idea of the structures of power. Yeah, and the way that, the way that the common soldier is screwed over a lot of the time, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Guns of the Dawn is actually how I found you. I had a friend who read Guns of the Dawn, and then I read Shrouds of the App first, but a bunch of us in our group read Guns of the Dawn first. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, it's still one of the books I've written that I'm fondest of, but for whatever reason, it never really took off in the way that some of the others have. So it's sort of sitting there, and I'd quite like to go back and write another book in that setting, honestly. But there doesn't seem to be the demand, unfortunately.
I mean, if all of us on BookTube could be the demand, that would be great. That's awesome. What? So I look at Guns of the Dawn and I see that, and I see a very, very like complete kind of story there. Where would you take the second one?
Well, so there is definitely what I think probably happens next in Guns of the Dawn is you get a kind of a royalist exodus, as you do after the English Civil War. And there is mentioned, there's a place, I can't remember what it's even called. There is a place which is kind of Imperial France, which is mentioned in the first book, because they have previously had a war against it, in like the previous generation's war. Mm-hmm. And that's where they would go, because that's still a royalist place. And so what would probably happen is that Emily would end up getting sent over there, because she's able to kind of walk the walk as far as getting on with that kind of social stratum goes, because the new government would be worried about what those royalists are getting up to, and that they're probably plotting some sort of counterinsurgency, which of course they are. Yeah. And then you can have a whole lot of fun with, all right, is there a kind of a Napoleon figure kicking about at the edge of the French army who might be interested in sort of leading the military wing of a of a revolution over there, and do you get the Denlanders sort of spreading their Republican creed and that kind of thing. So I think that there is definitely a space to take that story as like in kind of it will be some years later, and Emily would be sort of married and settled down, and obviously she would then someone would turn up saying, right, we really need you specifically
to be the ambassador.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I possibly more kind of Scarlet Pimpernel secret agent sort of stuff. But yes, there's definitely it's one of those things. I think if I ever get a situation where I can just write, I've got a chunk of time and I can just write a book on spec and then just see if anyone wants it. That's probably the book I would write, because I would really like to do it. And it's like I said, I don't think it's not a book that's had a huge audience, but the people who read it do seem to like it.
I can attest to that. Yeah, that I think for you, honestly, with a lot of your writing, a lot of times like it'll be a good book, and then I get to the ending, I'm like, oh my god, the ending just completely comes out of not necessarily comes out of nowhere, because when I look back, it's all set up, but the ending just completely blows me out of the water. Like the final scene of Guns of the Dawn was like, I don't want to use mind blowing so much, but it really hit me in the gut of just like, wow, this is where this book has always been pointing to, and it was the inevitable lead in to the book, and then it's just like So Anita has a good question. What's the most difficult book that you've written out of all the books that you've written?
So there's a few that have given me headaches. I think the most difficult technical one is probably Children of Ruin, mostly because getting the octopus viewpoint down and the octopus point of view scenes with the way that their cognition is so non-human, so sort of distributed, and the fact that they don't kind of know how they do anything or know how anything works, because all that stuff is going on at a subconscious level. And that very nearly broke my brain, to be honest. I would with the City of Last Chances and that series of books, I thought those were going to be very difficult because I was trying a rather different writing style. And rather than planning everything out, I had my setup and my characters and my world, and then I just sort of let things run and followed the characters around with a notebook to see what would happen. So I didn't have any of the events planned out, which felt very nerve-wracking at the time. But actually, it all obviously sort of subconscious process was keeping track of things. It all comes round in each of the 3 books I've written in that style now, and everything has come round to a satisfactory conclusion within the kind of length I wanted.
How do you think that works within your brain, like that you can actually get it to that point where it's satisfactory without kind of like going off in left field and right field, just spreading out too far?
I think it is not a thing I could have done even just a few years ago. I think it is something that comes with experience. You get to the point where your brain is so used to thinking in terms of that long form story and used to the idea of, right, at this point in the story, certain things are supposed to happen, and you need a big moment here, and then you need to develop here, and you have a sense of all the different plates that are spinning at any given time, and all of those little character arcs that interweave and form the story. I think it's a thing you kind of train your brain to do by writing, and then I'm now at a point where I can kind of feel, right, I can do it without a net. I mean, I still plan most of my stuff out, I will say, but that particular series, because I want that very nice sort of mosaic feel of all these little pieces and all the small lives, that seems to give me the story I want.
It's come out really well. City Last Chances, while it's definitely like super different, it's been just a joy to read. City Last Chances, House of Wounds, and Open Wounds, and I'm really looking forward to all the necromancer stuff in Day of Shattered Faith, because like that's probably one of my favorite parts of House of Open Wounds, just like the necromancer politics.
Yes, there's I mean, one of the interesting things in working within that world is having certain aspects of the world building flesh themselves out. so that I have a certain idea of how the demons work and how the necromancy works in City of Last Chances with the ghosts and things like that.
Mhm.
And then you get to see another layer of that with the Palestine military applications of it in House of Open Wound, and then Days of Shattered Faith are the whole extra layer of detail fleshed out as you get more into the precise kind of mechanics of it. So it all comes together very organically, and hopefully it doesn't feel like it's sort of numbers on a page and statistics and that kind of role play ready sort of thing that can occasionally feel a bit mechanical, I guess. But at the same time, I think it all fits together nicely, and each time a new kind of revelation about it has occurred to me, it meshes very nicely and makes sense of some of the things that have gone before.
Nice. Yeah. Mike, who he's almost done, I think, with all of your work. He's tracked down a bunch of your short stories, and he's finding that a difficult time.
But thank you very much.
Done everything. It's the amount of stuff he's gone through, but he loves your non-human. And honestly, your non-human characters in everything that you write are absolutely spectacular. I really vibe with the theme that you've talked about in some of your other videos with just like sympathizing with the other. I think just personally that vibes with me a lot. And it's coming, like, especially with like Alien Clay and some of your other stuff, like with Children of Time, reading that has just been eye-opening in and of itself, just like how I view the world and how people view each other as well. It's been interesting.
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, I used to read a absolute shed load of science fiction as a kid, and there is that particular genre of story that there was an awful lot of it about, which is sort of the square-jawed Earth hero goes to alien planet and finds some aliens who are just sort of a bit daft in some weird way, and the aliens do cause a problem, and the human, of course, is able to solve the problem, and that is hooray. And even back then, even reading these stories at like 8 years old, I said, well, these humans are very dull, and the aliens are much more interesting, and that very much set me on that path. And then, I mean, weirdly enough, do you know the Corman sci-fi Magnificent Seven in space film, Battle Beyond the Stars?
I can't say I do.
It's one of those films that is far better than it has any right to be. But one of the things you get, so it's a Magnificent Seven thing. There is a planet under threat. Hero goes, recruits a bunch of kind of violent ne'er-do-wells to come and defend the planet from evil space empire. But one of the characters he recruits is basically this particularly sort of sinister lizard man called Cayman of the Lambda Zone, who is absolutely, in any other film, would be a villain. Like it's probably a second tier, sort of not terribly important villain, even at that. And in this film, because of the structure of the film, he gets to be a hero. And that, I remember just seeing that as a kid and thinking, yes, that's kind of you are allowed to have characters like that as very, very non-human looking characters as heroes in things. And that was an enormous kind of light bulb moment for me.
That's awesome. Do you think that if you had been writing much earlier in just the sci-fi fantasy lifetime, weird word to use, do you think you would have had as much success with a lot of stuff like Children of Time and things like that are just out there compared to some of the other stuff that was being written, or just wildly different from some of the other stuff that was being written?
It's very difficult to say, and honestly, given how well it has done, I genuinely feel it must have landed exactly at the right moment for when people were ready for it. So it's quite possible that if it had come out even a few years before, then there might not have been the same kind of audience. There might be, I mean, there's not much at the time which is in that kind of territory, or certainly nothing that I was aware of at the time. I mean, a lot of people have mentioned Peter Watts's Blind Sight is one of the books that people mention, and that was quite a bit earlier. I think I can't remember when that was. And then there's Werner Vinge's A Deepness in the Sky, and for that matter, Fire Upon the Deep, which are very good kind of alien viewpoint books, which were a little bit earlier. But overall, it was a part of the genre that nobody was particularly playing in, at the time that Children of Time came out in 2015.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So the Parthenon, or just wondering, were they inspired by from any of your interest in
40K? So not specifically, except that on a purely scientific basis, if you are going to have, sorry, my cat is getting adventurous. If you're going to have a group of kind of cloned super soldiers, it's so much more efficient for them to be women. If you were doing Space Marines, honestly, I would advise people, if you wanted to create Space Marines, then they should kind of be women, full stop, because there's a whole range of genetic problems that women don't have, basically because of the way the XY chromosomes work. And so genetically, the female the female genome is kind of the baseline one that the male is a variant of, and so it just kind of makes more sense. And the name Parthenon comes from the phrase parthenogenesis, which is generally female organisms just giving birth to clones of themselves. It happens with various types of animal. Aphids in particular do it quite a lot. And so it just seemed to make more sense. Right, if I want to do this sort of thing, why not just have it as women? Because actually, scientifically, that's a bit sounder. So it's not specifically a sisters of battle thing, but potentially it's a reaction. Arguably, it's a reaction to the corner of 40K fandom who are very keen that there only ever be male Space Marines. Because I'm just like, the male Space Marine doesn't make sense. Female Space Marines would make so much more sense scientifically.
I mean, it's 40K. Is science like the biggest concern?
I mean, probably not. I guess not. I mean, and also, even where science is a concern in 40K, doing the most efficient or sensible thing scientifically is almost explicitly not the way that the Imperium works. But
yes, yeah, that's really cool. So going back to Shadows of the Apt real quick. Do you have a name for the world? Like a lot of places.
No. I almost there's a certain level of naming I'm really bad at, so I very seldom name the worlds, because also it's just like people don't tend to name. Well, the world is like the world. That's why we have the word the world. That is, you don't tend to need to give a name to a world unless you're specifically distinguishing it from somewhere else. Which is why obviously Tolkien's Middle Earth makes a perfect sense, because it is specifically being distinguished from either in time or place other parts of the Earth. But having Kryn or Toril or that sort of thing is just like, what you need another place really before you need to start naming your whole planet anything in particular. And you just kind of assume, well, no, I'm writing from the point of view of the characters on the world. Then they don't necessarily not necessarily going to have fancy names for it. Sure. Those names are very much for the convenience of the reader.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I when I was reading it, like that was one of my big questions that like always sat in the back of my mind. Like, what is everybody calling this place? Like, do they just have it wherever they're at? It never came up. What is your favorite setting in like Shadows of the Apt? Like,
that's a tough one. I mean, it kind of moves around. I mean, obviously Collegium. I have a lot of fun with Collegium, purely I think because the city develops quite a lot through the series, so it's very much not the same city at the end of the series as you see at the beginning. The cities around the Exel Sea are probably one of the places I'd like to explore more, because there is a lot of essentially sort of background material that doesn't really make it to the page that I was aware of. There is a whole long history with just how people have settled that area and the politics between the cities, which you only really get to see the edges of through, say, through Che's visit there in books 3 and 4.
Yeah, there's a lot of like tiny things with Exalcy, whether it's the pirates or the dragonflies versus the dragonflies on top of their dragonflies fighting against the new aviators and stuff like that. That was really fun.
I mean, one thing I would say, if people are interested in Shadow to the Apt, you may or may not know that there are 4 extra books of shorter fiction called Tales of the Apt from Newcom Press. Which I think we're now going on to. I don't know. I think probably not, just because I don't think there's quite the same demand. I would absolutely love it if they did, but I think that the Broken Binding editions are quite sort of resource intensive to create. So it would surprise me if they went for them. But yeah, it would be grand if they did.
But I feel like that there should, like, I don't know. It feels like I don't know if chicken before the egg is the right thing there, but like short stories in general don't get as much marketing press. So I feel like the reason there wouldn't be demand is because not as many people know about them, like you were saying. So, I read Heirs of the Blade, and Heirs of the Blade was definitely one of the my least favorite in the series for a variety of reasons. And that was before I read the short stories, and I've since read the short stories, and I am a lot more excited to get back to Heirs of the Blade when I read it, because I actually understand where some of these characters came from. Because I do feel like that it'll probably be a different experience having read a lot of the background for the characters, so it's a lot easier to connect to a lot of the characters that are just brand spanking new in that book. So I think if they were to print them, people would buy them, and I think people would be excited to buy them. But
like I said, I'd be very, very happy for them to do so. Certainly.
Yeah, I think the minimalistic nature of them is really great. Like, while they're not my favorite covers, like the original Peer covers are actually my favorite covers. They only got like 5.
Oh, the John Sullivan ones.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Good to know the artist. Those covers are amazing.
I think I prefer so Sullivan did covers for books 1 to 7 in the UK as well, which are different covers to those. Mm-hmm. Which I think I prefer the UK ones if you can get a look at them. But then there was a weird shake-up, and then after 7, the whole series got recovered. I can't remember the name of the artist, Alan something, which were also very nice covers, but it does mean that there is no complete Sullivan run of the covers.
Yeah,
and then there was the whole extra set of covers that were only ever on ebooks.
Yes.
So the series has had like 4 separate cover designs now.
So
but the ebook ones were really fun. They were kind of like it was that kind of maps and weapons and things in that kind of vaguely Joe Abercrombie sort of style. And that was a very nice set of covers. And I was always a bit gutted that those never really existed as physical objects.
Yeah, I think they would have. While I like a lot of the other covers a lot more, I think they would have been like, with the weapons on the spines, that could have looked really good on it. But we've seen all of these covers, because me and Anita and another friend of ours, Bengus, we actually did a tier ranking of all the covers, because I was like looking through and I was like, there's so many covers, we need to judge all of them. It was really funny. We didn't get to any of the foreign covers because I couldn't find like a lot of information.
There weren't, because I know with one exception, that all the Polish editions had used the UK covers, and I know there were some Bulgarian covers which were different, but they were very, very based on the UK ones for the first few books.
Okay.
And other than that, I don't think there were. Oh, and there were some quite odd German ones, which were quite Game of Thronesy in the early editions. So just like sort of weapons and helmets and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there haven't been. It's not been a massively heavily translated series.
Yeah. How much how many of your works, like Children of Time probably has been translated quite a few times, but like what's your experience with getting your works translated?
I mean, it's happening a lot now, for quite a long time. So Children of Time, Shadows of the App did very well in Poland,
Okay.
but not terribly well anywhere else. And I mean, it only got to 5 books in the States before it kind of fizzled out. And for a long time after that, nothing was really getting translated at all.
Mhm.
And then Children of Time landed, and we started to get translation offers in. And I think I don't know quite how many languages that's been through, but it's still being translated into new languages, and it's been in dozens of different countries, which is amazing. Dogs of War, weirdly enough, I think is my second most translated book. That,
Really?
although that wasn't a huge hit at the time, that's been quite a almost like a sort of underground cult favorite. And it's done very well, I think, in France and Germany, and is now being translated. I think there's been a very nicely covered Vietnamese edition. The Dogs of War, for some reason, lends itself to really good covers.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean that's the one I think I would. That's the one it's probably worth tracking down variant covers on, because like the Russian cover and the Vietnamese cover, they're all very very dramatic.
I'll have to look into that. Yeah, I didn't even know it was Spanish at the time, but I picked up the Spanish edition of Spiderlight. I was like, oh, this is a cover that I haven't seen before, and then it's like, oh, it's Spanish. I'm like, okay.
Yes, I love that the Spanish Spiderlight cover is brilliant. It's very they get the covers, the characters very
For those of you who haven't seen it,
it's upside down. But, yeah, the artist absolutely nails the all the characters involved. But I mean, my favorite covers at the moment are definitely the City of Lost Chances in that series. Joe Wilson's just amazingly detailed art.
I love, those covers are absolutely my favorite as well.
I've just been sent actually the cover for the third one for approval, and that's looking fantastic.
Yeah, I've seen like the yellow and silvery stuff of that on online, and that's been really good. I really like also like the spine work that I think Goldsborough's been doing.
Oh, the Goldsborough special editions. Yes, they're just the most beautiful books of mine that have ever been produced, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. Do you ever have input with that in terms of like color scheme or anything along those lines?
I generally, we get to talk about it. I mean, I certainly don't get any kind of power of veto, but certainly with those particular covers, because the details are very, very heavily based on the book, which is quite unusual and flattering. I mean, the Children of Time cover is very, very effective, but it's a spaceship and a planet. It's not necessarily the right spaceship or the right planet, but it's just like it's telling you what sort of book it is. But with City of Lost Chances, every single detail relates to something in the book, which is amazing as a writer, because you almost never get that. And so was quite a lot of backwards and forwards with those about just the specific details and all the little bits in the corners and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's really why they're like the best covers, because like some of my issues with a lot of your sci-fi books, so Children of Time, at Final Architecture, Doors of Eden, they all look like they could be in the same series.
I think a lot of that is that. So Pan Macmillan, the publisher, are very keen to have a particular brand with my books, so that you can see that, and that looks like an Adrian Tchaikovsky book, and which series it might belong to is sort of secondary.
Yeah.
And it is. I think it's purely a marketing thing to draw the eye of people who have read my books. And I mean, I'm quite happy to run with it on the basis that I'm sure they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And if you had wildly different sort of styles that differentiated the series more, you might get people passing over one series because they didn't realize it's the same guy who wrote that other book.
Yeah, true. I'm probably a little bit biased. I have my own biases here, just because like being a huge book reader, I evaluate reading books a lot differently than the average consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably a lot of where they don't appeal to me, or the marketing department of Pan Macmillan isn't appealing to people like me in terms of things, just because like that's not the majority of people.
Essentially, what though I've just seen when the Alien Clay gets its US release, it's got a completely different cover, which I think is the first time that Orbit has done that.
I thought it was just like they changed the red to yellow.
No, so the blue yellow is the standard UK one. The kind of blue pink one is, I believe, the Broken Binding special edition. But there is completely different art. You won't see it online, I think, because it's literally just being put together now. But you'll probably see it quite soon. It feels to me like they are going for a bit of that kind of some of the older Jeff Vandermeer Southern Reach sort of covers, or that kind of. It feels quite like a Vandermeer cover to me, which I think is quite appropriate given the content of the book.
Do they at least have a significant amount of yellow in it?
There is definitely yellow in it. Yes, but it's more of a, unusually for an American cover compared to a UK cover. It's more of an iconic one.
Okay.
Which is because I mean the split is normally the UK covers tend to be sort of simple, stylized, iconic, and US covers tend to be more of a naturalistic sort of an action shot or something. An actual scene from the book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Urza has another question. Is it common for artists not to read the books that they make covers for?
I think it's probably almost universal. I would be very surprised if artists had the time to read every book that they do the cover for, because reading books takes a long time, and they need to get things done to make a living. What I think tends to happen is the publisher gives the artist a brief, and that hopefully and one of the things I would say about the head of Zeus giving a brief to Joe Wilson for City of Last Chances and those books, they're obviously giving a very detailed and very good brief that is being given by someone who's read the book, and probably with excerpts from the. I mean, I see a few of these occasionally when they the book I've got coming out next year from Pam Macmillan called Shroud. I saw basically the artist brief, and it was, here is a passage from the book that shows you what this looks like. Here's a passage from the book that shows you what that looks like, and then some sort of contextual text around it to explain what's going on.
That's cool. So speaking of Shroud, I have, I don't know, a few guesses from what I've seen about what it is. So is that the solar punk raccoon detective book?
No, it is not. That will probably going to be. I think that's slated for 2026 from Tor.com, and that is Green City Wars, or at least that's my working title for it.
We'll see if it.
Yeah, Shroud is another standalone kind of weird alien ecology book.
So that was my second guess. You've mentioned a weird alien ecology that's weirder than Alien Clay.
Yes, and one of the main things is I wanted to push the weirdness level, so I got together with a scientist called William Baines from Cambridge University, who's an astrobiologist, astrophysicist, and just sat with him for a couple of hours talking out various weird ways you could get a working ecosystem out of non-Earth-like biochemical pathways and things like that. And so we ended up with something very, very weird. In a world where the surface conditions are incredibly hostile from an Earth point of view. It's very cold. It's very high pressure. There is no free oxygen, and there is no light because the atmosphere is basically opaque. And at the same time, all of the life on the planet has evolved to transmit radio signals. And so once you are down there, let's say, for example, in some sort of disaster, you literally cannot contact anyone because you can't get a signal out. So it's kind of a survival story of people who basically crash on this.
So they transmit radio signals, but the radio signals don't go beyond the Shroud.
Well, the planet is basically the entire planet, or moon, in fact, as it is screaming all the time, and there is so much radio. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much one of the first lines of the of the book is like the moon was screaming.
That's like January 2025, right?
I probably not January. I think it's going to be around the same time next year as Alien Clay was in the UK this year. Okay. So about March-ish, Aprilish.
Cool. That makes me more excited for that one because screaming moods. It's great. Awesome. How's the fourth? Do we have a release date for the fourth children book?
No, I mean that I imagine that will be the same time, 26.
Okay.
This is predicated on me actually writing the thing, so
okay.
that's part of my kind of plan for this year. Is I will be writing Children of Strife. So I've got the concepts together. I've got all the ideas. I need to plot it out and then write it. But that's the next project or the project after next. For the first time in quite a while, I'm finding myself under a certain amount of deadline pressure. So which has affected. It's not particularly tight deadline pressure, but it does mean that it affects the order of what things I want to write. So things I might want to write now, I'm going to have to put off because I know I've got more time for them.
Does that tend to affect your creative process at all?
Not particularly. I mean, it's once I get invested to a certain extent in something, certainly once I actually start putting pen to paper, I am kind of fixed on that project.
Mm-hmm.
So it does. I can't just pick up and put down stuff and chop and change between different books. So it does mean I have to be quite careful what I start on, because once I've started, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, I envy that focus, because sometimes I try to write and then I have another idea and I try to go off on that one, and it's a work in progress.
Yeah, I think managing your kind of creative queue is very important sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How much research do you typically do on each of these books? I know you've said that you usually do like more research for your sci-fi ones than your fantasy ones, right?
It varies a great deal. I mean, one of the things certainly with me is I will try and do as little research as I have to. But a lot of the time I'm writing the book based on, I guess, what you could characterize as pre-search, which is to say stuff that I have read has then created the idea for the book. So, for example, my personal exploration of the 1848 revolutions in Europe, much of which came out of a phenomenal podcast called Revolutions by Mike Duncan, led to City of Lost Chances, because it's that kind of setting and that kind of sort of social setup that you've got going on. So I didn't then need to go back and do a lot of research in the period, because I'd done the work previously, but also because I was doing a completely secondary world version of it, so I could take a lot of liberties without needing to be accurate to anything. When I'm doing something more scientific, if it's hard science, then I need to get the science side of it as right as possible. And so with the children's series especially, or anything else where the science is, or the Alien Clay or Shroud or books like that, I need to set what I think of as a left wall. So you build your left wall of all the basic real world things that you need to comply with, and then that means you expand away from that, but you can't expand in that direction because you that is the wall of these things are set. And so it varies a great deal, and actually with the real trick is being able to look at an idea and work out, right, what do I not know about? Because it's very hard often to realize how much you don't actually understand, because frequently there are topics that you kind of think you do, and it's based on a lot of assumptions that don't necessarily bear out.
Yeah, there's that graph of like confidence, like that I've seen on go around. It's like confidence you have in the subject versus the amount of knowledge that you have.
Yeah.
And it's like at the very beginning, there's this huge peak, and then it goes all the way down. So once you get past that peak, it's great.
Yes, it's that whole a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and one of the meanings of that is actually it's more dangerous than no knowledge, because when you have no knowledge, you generally understand that you don't understand something. But if you know just a little, you do get this enormous sense of, yes, I completely understand this topic now. And then you break through that, like you're saying, you suddenly realize, actually, the more you know, the more you understand how little you know, sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yes. have definitely experienced that in dealing with people. it's it is a constant.
Mhm.
Um, Going to a kind of, I don't know, more fun question. What do you have a favorite bug or adjacent?
I mean, I'm very fond of praying mantises.
Okay.
And I think the praying mantises and jumping spiders both
Mm-hmm.
have a facility which is extremely unusual for arthropods, which is that they pay attention. They have a kind of a focused view, so they will move to follow movement, or in the mantis's case, because unusually it has an actual mobile neck, it will tilt its head to follow movement, which gives you that sense of presence and intelligence that you don't necessarily get. I mean, a lot of animals do not look at you particularly. So even a lot of mammals, certainly like herbivore mammals, they have quite a wide angle eye in the side of their heads. You don't, a deer, for example, won't look directly at you. It'll generally look at you more side on because that's how its eye is set up. And so you don't get that sense of contact that you do with a human. But with a jumping spider, because they do pay attention and they have that focus,
Mm-hmm.
they will follow you around, and they will obviously react to you. And there is a kind of a commonality of existence that is going on in a way that you don't necessarily get with many of the types of animal, and certainly many of the types of insect, where they just have the just enormous broad view of basically everything around them all the time.
Nice.
So yes, mantises. I mean, I've always found mantises extremely aesthetically pleasing, just very elegant and sort of poised.
Yeah, I think that comes across, especially in like some of your stuff with Tissamon in Shadows of the Apt. In that whole thing, follow you around. So going off of that, would you be a mantis if you could be a bug, or would there be a specific bug that you would like to be?
It could be a bug. That's rather, yeah. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, obviously, I mean, aside from the obvious pitfalls of being a male mantis, I mean, oh Lord, at some point I do want to do kind of like giant hyper evolved praying mantises as a thing, and if I could be that kind of bug, then yes. I mean, I think being any kind of regular bug is probably not the most enviable existence.
Nice. Ooh, okay. Hyper evolved. Anita, the beanie is on, but it's kind of like not there. I specifically was requested to get some sort of bug beanie, so I managed to find a dragon
awesome
beanie on Amazon. The other suggestions were to literally dress up as a mantis, ironically. So
that that would have given quite an odd odd tone to things, I feel.
Yes, just a little bit. So City of Last Chances in that whole world, there seems, compared to, I mean, maybe not compared to Shadows of the App, but compared to a lot of some of your other works, there seems to be quite a lot just in there. There's a ton of different elements, whether you have the Aloran and the factories and all this other, and the reprise, the
reproach,
craziness, the reproach. There we go. Thank you. What caused you to fit so much in there?
I mean, to a certain extent, a lot of it was just suggested by other parts of it.
Okay.
So it's one of those, my big intent with, actually, I mean, honestly, my intent with most of my stuff, but especially with that series, is I wanted to create a living world. And then in that living world, there would be living people, and the living people would have escapades, and generally try not to be traditional fantasy heroes, because that's dangerous. And they are basically just normal, they are innkeepers and pawnbrokers and just regular people. And the thing, once you are writing at the level of regular people, it means you actually have to write at rather than things being simpler, things become considerably more complicated, because your traditional fantasy hero has a very, very small set of things that they're worried about. There is a magic ring, you need to get it into a volcano. There's a lot of sort of local color going on between here and there, but that's kind of it. It's a very focused existence. If you are just a living person, especially one who is in a city or any kind of large organization, you have relations with many, many people. You belong to a variety of these overlapping groups. You have opinions about other people that are shaped by the history of your sort of the groups that you are a part of and the groups that they are a part of. There are recent events, there are older events, there are ancient events. There is this weird magic wood in the middle of your city that occasionally turns out to be a gateway to any number of other worlds. And therefore things come out, and indeed people can get out of the city if you need to get out of the city, for example, because it's been occupied by sort of this ideological dictatorship. So it's one of those, the more you think about it, the more you kind of discover, because every decision you make is not only filling in space, it's also kind of setting up walls that mean there must be another space next to it.
Yeah.
And this is kind of how I like to do world building anyway, but I think it gives you that sense, hopefully gives you that sense of this very immersive, real place where the stakes are real and the people are real, and essentially it is far more immersive to have a situation where someone needs to work out where their next meal is coming from because they have no money, and they've just given their blanket to God, rather than the great heroic crusade to defeat the Dark Lord, because once you're on a heroic crusade to defeat the Dark Lord, you very seldom have to worry about where the food's coming from. And I believe they do. I mean, to give Professor Tolkien his due, yes, that does actually happen. And I know there is at least one point where Sam and Frodo were starving to death at some point. But it's not that, usually you get to a certain place and the elves will give you a bunch of lembas bread or whatever, because that's not the focus. Tolkien doesn't want to have to spend a large amount of time with them bickering about who has to go and catch fish or forage for mushrooms or whatever.
Yeah, or whether or not where they're going to the toilet is safe or not.
Yes.
Nice. Yeah, it definitely lends itself to a beautiful just tapestry of everything. Like when you're creating the mosaic of everything, it just even just the small things, like the Watcher in that one scene with the unions.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of contributes to that larger world.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the other things, obviously, the big events are definitely going on.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the Palestine sphere is expanding. You have revolutions, you have wars. But what I wanted to do was have all that stuff kind of going on in another room.
Mm-hmm.
So the characters involved in the book generally have far more things that are far more important to them than whether the revolution succeeds or who wins the war. And that's kind of, I think, how life tends to go. There are a relatively small number of people who are seriously invested in those sort of things, but those things then spill over and affect everyone else's lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see that. So Breaking Spines has a question about writing across multiple genres, and kind of leads into another question I have for you.
So, I mean, I've kind of always read sci-fi and fantasy from a very young age, and that is also, those are the genres I write in, and I'm kind of aware, those two genres are almost like they are the peaks of a very, very complex landscape. So there are lots of different places you can go, and some of those places are more sort of between the two. Like space opera is it's a science fiction trappings book, but frequently it has more of a fantasy sort of structure to it. If you look at, classically Star Wars is very much a magic fantasy story that happens to have spaceships in it.
Yeah. Agreed. Very much agreed.
Yeah. If I wanted to move to a genre I have not written, let's say I wanted to write a detective story, I feel that I should probably need to set aside a decent amount of time and read some fairly broad representations from that genre before I tried it, because I think the danger is, and you do occasionally see this, if you have a writer who is very used to writing in a certain genre and they look across to this other genre that may be doing quite well and think, well, that can't be too difficult. I will write a detective story, or write a romance, or I'll write a science fiction story for that matter, if they're not a sci-fi writer. You tend to get the most vanilla possible results because they are not aware of the territory that has already been traveled.
Mm-hmm.
So the classic one is you get a lit fic writer saying, "Oh, I will write a science fiction book, and it will be this amazing, innovative book about artificial people." Who has ever heard of such an amazing concept? And the thing is, Rossum's Universal Robots came out in the very early 20th century. Artificial people, and Frankenstein came out considerably earlier than that. Artificial people has been a mainstay of science fiction since before science fiction was a thing. Similarly, if I was to write a detective story, I'd probably get to the point of saying, I've got this amazing idea. There'll be a murder in a room, and the room will be locked from the inside. And that's amazing. No one's ever done this before. And that's you need to get a sense of the memes and the tropes and the cliches of a genre, I think, or you are in danger of simply unknowingly and unexaminedly repeating them.
So what you're saying is someone should go find like a meme subreddit of a genre and do their research exclusively from that.
Well, I mean, honestly, that would be better than not. That would be better than nothing. If you could get the 10 most time-worn cliches that to either avoid or at least use in a way that made it clear that you were using them
in a self-aware way.
Exactly that.
Yeah, hey, it could work. That would be an interesting book to see if they were fueled exclusively by that. This is a frustration. I know you've read a little bit of KJ Parker, and he's refreshing in his own way when he goes into some of that sort of thing.
I've lost your audio.
Oh,
no, you're back now. Okay, I don't know who just where you were from your mic, but
okay. What is it? But yeah, I know. So, where was I going with that? Have you been? Kind of going back to the last question. What have you been reading recently? Like, what's been on your mind with that?
Oh, I've been on a real T. Kingfisher kick at the moment. I've been going through her back catalogue of some extremely effective sort of creepy fiction. So the Twisted Ones. I've read the Twisted Ones and I read the Hollow Places pretty much back to back, and those are both amazing sort of creepy folk horror, and also at the same time a kind of a re-examination of some of some existing tropes. In fact, so they are kind of homages to the White People and the Willows, which is some classic early folk horror stories. In the same way, she's recently done an homage to House of Usher with What Moves the Dead. So yes, that's been my. And on the back of that, I went onto Blue Sky and got a bunch of recommendations. So I've got a load of other things loaded up on my phone in audio format to go back to. At the moment, I'm actually re-listening to the audio of my own Elder Race, because I will also be doing a follow-up book to that this year. And so I'm just refreshing myself on some of the details of the world.
That makes me excited. I read it recently, and I really like the exploration of just the mental health of our sci-fi protagonist there. With just that was very self-examining there. Do you get a lot of inspiration from like TVs and movies? Because this is something that Mike's been bringing up a lot when we've been talking. Of just like, I see a lot of TV shows in here.
I mean, I don't think it's possible to be entirely uninfluenced by anything you've seen or read. So, I mean, I wasn't a huge sort of Firefly. So for me, the final architecture is probably more influenced by Farscape, especially with that kind of Firefly style ragged band of found family, but a bunch of them are aliens.
Okay.
Although I do kind of feel that maybe the text of that kind of show is Blake 7, which was an enormous favorite of mine when I was a kid.
That's cool.
Certainly Farscape has always felt very much like sort of an updated Blake 7.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Another very just very specific City Last Chances question. There's a certain character that comes from the wood in City Last Chances, that is searching for some stuff, and me and Mike have talked about like where that character came from, and the two possibilities that we've narrowed it down to is Redemption's Blade and Shadows of the Apt. What?
Oh Lord, no, definitely not. No, I mean, so that character does not come from any particular world that I have detailed outside the series. I'm not saying, given the device I've given myself with the wood and the way it works, that possibility certainly is open for me should I wish to be particularly self-referential.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But yes, no, that character comes from
a place we haven't seen yet.
A place we haven't seen yet, which is basically like it's an entire world if the world was a very high magic World War One.
Okay.
Basically, cool. That's very much what that character kind of looks like in his full kit.
Yeah, I when I first read it, I was like, oh my gosh, Shadows of the Apt, and then I read it the second time, and I was like, am I doubting that? I don't necessarily see where that fits. And then he was talking about Redemption's Blade. I'm like, I could see that, but I actually think
he does actually have the sword that cuts through anything, which is a Redemption's Blade thing, and I think I was just so fond of it as a device in Redemption's Blade that it kind of, that's probably what I see the link, because that's probably why I've just reused it. It's just I remember having so much fun with it.
Yeah, Urza and I had the same like reaction of just like, oh wow, we didn't realize that was going to happen with that character.
Good. You know what it is? One of the most difficult but most satisfying parts of writing is getting that state where you have the revelation and it does come as a surprise, and then at the same time, hopefully the reader can look back and say, yes, I didn't see it coming, but at the same time that makes perfect sense with all the stuff that's happened previously.
Yeah,
there's just that very, very delicate balancing point, but I hopefully that does hit that way for most readers. And yes, I put a lot of work into just calibrating that as carefully as I could.
Yeah, and it was great. I guess finally, probably one of our last questions we'll do what Dale was asking, and then I have one final one. Kind of like, how do you know what length to go for?
Okay, so usually the idea will come prepackaged with its length. Okay. I've had a few projects where it's shifted early on in the process. But in general, a particular idea you'll see how much baggage it comes with, for example. So frequently with a novella, it'll be, right, I have one idea and I would like to explore this idea very thoroughly. And 40,000 words is, certainly for a sci-fi project, a really good length to get one idea out of the way. So no side quests, no diversions, no B-plots, everything wrapped up in that one book. If you do want the B-plot, if there is a good B-plot that would complement it, that's going to push it to a novel. I don't often do dedicated series. The Final Architecture was the first one in a while. A lot of the time when I'm writing a series, so with the Children of novels or Dogs of War or something like that, is I will write a book and the world of the book will be bigger than the book and other ideas will then turn up. So I'll write another book and then another book, each of which is building on the previous one. But each book will have its own very self-contained plot. And I mean, in general, even with a dedicated series, I've always tried to have a payoff at the end of every book, because I tend to find as a reader, I'm very unsatisfied with a series where the book just ends.
Yeah.
Or just ends on a cliffhanger even. The idea, I always feel that as a writer, you need to give a payoff to your readers, so that they've just worked their way through 500 pages of book. They are owed some sort of closure on the events of that book, even if the series itself is carrying on.
Nice. Yeah, I can definitely see that within your writing. And then I guess one final question with going back to Shadows of the Apt and City Last Chances. So both of these, like you said with Shadows of the Apt, it was based on an RPG to begin with. But City Last Chances kind of feels, I don't know, is vibrant enough to be something similar. Would you ever be like open to releasing tabletop RPGs
I would absolutely love to. I mean, I've been trying to get a Shadows of the Apt tabletop game off the ground for some considerable time, with various sort of things falling over.
Yeah.
But certainly with the City of Lost Chances series, yes, I would love to get that setting set up as a game. That would be grand. I can think of a number. I think that a number of modern game settings, like say Forge in the Dark, or the kind of the Spire Heart system, which has a name and I can't remember what it's called, that the Rowan Rook Descartes use. That would work really well for that setting. And yeah, it's the series. Hopefully, the series is going to run to 5 books. You'll see a number of different parts of the world, and you'll have quite an expansive sort of sandbox to play in. So yeah, absolutely, that would be grand. I am myself not a game designer, so whilst it would be nice to have some input, I would definitely need to take a backseat to someone who knew what they were doing in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I always thought that would be great. I mean, for both of these worlds, but yeah, sometimes the getting the idea person with somebody who actually can do something with that can sometimes be the difficulty. Nice, cool. So, do you have anything else you would like to say for today, or?
I'm just trying to think. So, I mean, is it okay just to give a brief rundown of kind of what's coming out in the future?
Yeah, let's do it.
So we've got obviously Alien Clay has just come out in the UK and is going to be out in the US later this year. Mm-hmm. I can't precisely remember when. In June we're getting Service Model, which is my it's sort of robot apocalypse book about it's I think the best description I've come up with it is basically it's kind of Mad Max, except instead of Max it's C-3PO.
Yeah, I think one of the comments you've made in the past, I think that really resonated with me, is the Butler and the Butlerian Jihad.
Yes. And then there'll be at the end of the year will be Days of Shattered Faith. Mm-hmm. I may also have novella length stuff coming out in the Warhammer field later on, late this year, I think, in their fantasy line this time. I'm having a lot of fun writing Age of Sigmar stuff for them.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So we have a bind up for Terrible Worlds Revolutions. Do you know anything about a possibility of a bind up for the Terrible Worlds Destinations?
Yes, that's now that Put Away Childish Things is out, which will be the 3rd book in that set. Then yes, there should be one which will be Walking to Aldebaran, One Day All This Will Be Yours, Put Away Childish Things, as a single volume. Good. In that general style. And then there's going to be another 2 sets of 3 novellas going forward. So the first one of those, I think it's another one actually that is not quite out this year, but will be out very soon. It's called Saturation Point, which will be Terrible Worlds Transformations.
Cool. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. Specifically Terrible Worlds Destinations, because it is hard to find those novellas right now that are not.
Yeah, they were very limited print runs in the physical.
Mm-hmm. Which is just a tad bit frustrating, but considering how late I'm getting to their game. All right, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on.
It's lovely to be asked. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for watching the replay. If that's where you're at, feel free to keep track of Adrian on his socials. You're on Blue Sky, and then a bunch of other things, correct?
Yeah, Blue Sky, and there's adriantchaikovsky.com is the website, and there's a contact form there if anyone does want to get in touch.
And I can confirm that it does work. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good day.